In the early hours of October 5, 1994, firefighters responded to a blaze in a quiet Swiss village. At first glance, it appeared to be a tragic house fire in the countryside. But as the smoke cleared and investigators stepped inside, what they discovered would unravel one of the most disturbing transnational cases of ritualized death in modern European history. Bodies lay arranged in ceremonial formation. Many wore ritual capes. Several had plastic bags over their heads. Others bore gunshot wounds. The building had been rigged with ignition systems designed to trigger after death, erasing evidence in fire. This was not an accident, and it was not, as early headlines declared, a simple mass suicide. Over the next 3 years, 74 people connected to a movement known as the Order of the Solar Temple would die across Switzerland, Canada, and France. The deaths were framed publicly as transits, spiritual passages to the star Sirius. But forensic reports repeatedly complicated that narrative, revealing bullets, sedatives, restraints, and scenes engineered for destruction. To understand how this happened, you have to go back decades. The Order of the Solar Temple did not emerge from the margins of society. Its members were not exclusively isolated drifters or socially detached individuals. Many were educated professionals, engineers, officials, business people. They lived in established communities, they held jobs, they paid taxes, they attended lectures that on the surface looked respectable. At the center of the movement were two men. Joseph de Mambro had trained as a jeweler and clockmaker. Over time, he drifted into esoteric spiritual circles. In 1956, he joined the ancient mystical order Rosae Crucis, remaining involved for more than a decade. During those years, he absorbed symbolic language and ritual vocabulary, including the term transit, a concept framing death as a spiritual passage rather than an end. By the 1970s, de Mambro had begun forming his own inner circle near the Swiss border. What started as small esoteric gatherings gradually evolved into a communal nucleus. Members pooled money. Authority consolidated. Ritual elements grew more theatrical. Robes, swords, secret rooms, staged manifestations of supposed supernatural events. De Mambro was not a charismatic public speaker. He did not fill auditoriums with energy. Instead, he cultivated mystique. Followers came to regard him as a mediator between themselves and hidden masters, invisible authorities guiding humanity from behind the veil. Luc Jouret, by contrast, was charisma personified. A Belgian physician, articulate and confident, Jouret toured French-speaking Europe and Quebec, giving lectures on ecology, wellness, and consciousness. Audiences numbered in the hundreds. His talks felt intellectual, urgent, and grounded in contemporary anxieties about environmental collapse and moral decline. But woven into those lectures were apocalyptic threads. Humanity, he argued, was approaching irreversible crisis. The Earth could not endure much longer. Something transformative, perhaps catastrophic, was imminent. For most attendees, it ended there. They went home. For a few, it was the beginning of recruitment. The Solar Temple functioned through concentric circles. Public lectures served as the outer layer. Interested individuals were invited into semi-private clubs. From there, a smaller number progressed into initiation rites. Secrecy intensified. Oaths were sworn. Ritual garments marked rank. Access to the inner fraternity required loyalty and silence. Scholar Jean-François Meyer later documented how selective this funnel was. In one lecture of roughly 700 attendees, only about 10 requested further contact. Months later, just one joined the inner group. The movement did not depend on mass recruitment. It depended on depth, the psychological intensification of those who entered. Within the inner circle, de Mambro claimed the existence of hidden elder brothers, cosmic authorities residing in an underground base. Members were told they were part of a spiritual elite preparing for humanity's next stage. Death itself was reframed as transit, a relocation to Sirius. a star system portrayed as a higher plane of existence. This theology fused neo-Templar symbolism, Rosicrucian mysticism, apocalyptic Christianity, and New Age cosmology. It did not reject religion, it absorbed it. The movement also accumulated wealth. Members donated significant sums. Properties were purchased in Switzerland and Quebec. Some communities were framed as refugees, safe havens for the coming transformation. By the early 1990s, however, cracks were appearing. In Quebec, authorities uncovered attempts by group members to acquire prohibited firearms and silencers. The weapons case brought surveillance, media scrutiny, and public suspicion. According to police reporting, some members left after the exposure. Investigators later suggested that departures during this period may have saved lives. Inside the movement, pressure mounted. When secrecy sustains authority, exposure becomes existential. Public scrutiny reinforced the group's persecution narrative. Police attention was interpreted not as law enforcement, but as prophecy fulfilled. By 1994, internal discussions turned toward departure. Recovered tapes would later capture leaders speaking about making the transit spectacular. Manifestos were prepared. Video testaments were recorded. Documents were mailed in advance to media outlets, shaping interpretation before investigators even arrived at the scenes. Fire was part of the plan, not merely as symbolism, but as erasure. On September 30th, 1994, a fire in Morin Heights, Quebec concealed what investigators described as homicide. Among the dead were former members, including an infant whose killing was reported as ritualistic. The implication was unmistakable. The ideology had crossed into targeted murder. Then came Switzerland. On the night of October 4 to 5, 1994, firefighters discovered 23 bodies in Jouret. Behind concealed walls lay ritual chambers filled with corpses arranged in ceremonial capes. Many had plastic bags over their heads. Several had gunshot wounds. The building had been wired with ignition devices intended to destroy the evidence after death. Some devices failed. That failure preserved tapes, computers, and documents that would later shape the investigation. Simultaneously, in Grange-sur-Salvan, 25 more bodies were found in burning chalets. The scenes were linked. The deaths were coordinated. Early speculation suggested leaders had ordered followers to die and fled. But among the dead were Jouret and Mambro themselves. The architects of the movement had died too, but forensic evidence suggested not all deaths were voluntary. Autopsies and crime scene analysis indicated sedation, restraint, and execution-style gunshot wounds in multiple victims. In December 1995, the pattern repeated in France. 16 bodies were discovered on a plateau in the Vercors Massif, arranged in a star-like formation echoing solar symbolism. Prosecutors reported bullets in all bodies and evidence of sedatives or toxic drugs. Children were among the dead. Authorities explicitly rejected the idea that this was a simple suicide pact. Investigations focused on homicide and conspiracy. Yet the ideology persisted. In March 1997, in Saint-Casimir, Quebec, a final fire claimed 5 more lives. The house had been rigged with propane tanks and timing devices. According to reporting, ignition attempts failed multiple times before finally succeeding. 3 teenagers survived, apparently drugged and separated from the adults. By then, the death toll stood at 74. Investigations spanned multiple countries and jurisdictions. Evidence handling became controversial. Critics later argued that some scenes were prematurely dismantled, feeding conspiracy narratives and public mistrust. The most enduring question remains: who chose to die and who was made to die? The record shows a mixture: adults who embraced the transit ideology as salvation, and victims showing signs of coercion, restraint, chemical incapacitation, or fatal gunshot wounds. The Solar Temple was not merely a suicide cult, it was a structure capable of both devotion and execution. It recruited through respectability. It sustained belief through secrecy. It reframed death as destiny. and when external pressure threatened legitimacy, it escalated. The leaders attempted to control their legacy through mailed manifestos and staged testaments. They sought to narrate their own disappearance as cosmic fulfillment, but the forensic record, bullets, plastic bags, sedatives, ignition systems, tells a different story. Fire was not purification, it was concealment. Death was not transcendence, it was management. The Order of the Solar Temple stands as a case study in how selective recruitment, theatrical ritual, and apocalyptic framing can converge into coordinated violence across borders. It demonstrates how belief can function as both sanctuary and weapon. 74 lives ended in 3 years. Some believed they were traveling to Sirius, others likely never consented. What remains is not a legend of ascension, but a record of engineered deaths, partially erased, partially preserved, and a reminder that ideology, when fused with authority and secrecy, can turn devotion into logistics and ritual into homicide.